this morning. Hare Krishna, Ramanuj Prabhu. Gurunaka Mataji, Hare Krishna. Very nice to see you all again. And so those who've come down from a long way away, from the coast, all the way down, I don't know the name of the place, but somewhere up the coast there. A long distance. And from Auckland. Some of the devotees have come all the way from Auckland. For 2 days, yesterday and today. And I'm heading back to Auckland tonight. 2 devotees, but our party left this morning early. They've gone for the Holy Festival in Auckland. So thank you for coming, all of you, local or outstation. We'll read from Srimad Bhagavatam today. I've got some of those honey things in there somewhere. Maybe voice is a bit hoarse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today we are fortunate to read from the 3rd canto Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 26, text number 8. Seems like a familiar verse, but I'm not sure. Kaya karana katritve karanam prakriting viduhu bhaktritve sukadukkanam purusham prakrite param. Kaya karana kartritve karanam prakriting viduhu bhaktritve sukadukkanam purusham prakrite param. Kaya karana kartritve karanam prakriting viduhu bhaktritve sukadukkanam purusham prakrite param. Kaya karana kartritve karanam prakriting viduhu bhaktritve sukadukkanam purusham prakrite param. Any ladies? Karya, the body. Karana, the senses. Kartritve, regarding the demigods. Karanam, the cause. Prakritim, material nature. Viduhu, the learned. The learned understand. Bhaktritve, regarding the perception. Sukha, of happiness. Dukhanam, and of distress. Purusham, the spirit soul. Prakrite, to material nature. Param, transcendental. The cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that when the Lord descends to this material world, he comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. He comes by his own will, and this can be called his pastime, or lila. But here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. Let's try to think as we go through this purport. In terms of Bhagavad Gita, many of these points are made very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita by Krishna. We may not be able to remember them all, but if together we may be able to remember many of the verses related to these points. The body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily reactions, as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change this conditioned life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to sanctify his senses, a material body is offered. Satisfy, not sanctify. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastimes by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, this interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entity's acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. End of purport. Translation again. Or you have it on the board, so no need. You can read it yourself. So this definitely, this verse, fundamental principles of material nature. It's one of the topics of Bhagavad Gita, material nature. And this verse very much, you could say, puts into perspective the living entity's situation and how we accept various kinds of bodies, both in this world and also if we want to transcend. That free will is there. Sometimes Prabhupada would say our only free choices between surrendering to Krishna or surrendering to Maya. Within the realms of Maya, or the material energy, influence of Maya, what choices the living entity has are very limited. It's like if we go on to an aeroplane or into a prison, you have some element, you could say, potentially free choice, but it's limited to the various facilities they're afforded therein. So the living entity within the material, we think we have our free will. We were discussing independence yesterday. We think we have our independence, but basically, according to the Bhagavad Gita, the living entity is basically controlled by the material energy. Prabhupada mentions here that the living entity is forced to basically act according to the modes of nature which are influencing us. Let's think of some verses. Let's go through this purport. Where in the Bhagavad Gita does Krishna say that he descends to this material world? Fourth chapter. Okay, there's a fourth chapter. Let's have a look at the fourth chapter. Transcendental knowledge, Divya. And there's several verses. We'll start off with one verse which is very much, it may even be referred to yesterday or today, I can't remember. This is text number 6, fourth chapter. Does it ring a bell? Text number 6. It does if you have your mobile open. Text number 6 is the fourth chapter. Ajopi son, well, I think we mentioned this yesterday. Ajopi son avyayatma bhutanam ishwaropi san prakiting svam adishtaya sambhavam yatma mayaya. Very famous verse. Not quoted maybe so much perhaps, but very famous nonetheless. Although Krishna says, I am unborn, and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all sentient beings, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. This more or less summarizes some of the aspects of today's verse and purport. Krishna, you can read the purport if you wish later on in the day if you want to do further study. We don't have time to go into that. Krishna is unborn. His body is eternal. He appears to be born. It's his pastime. He chooses that. Do we choose? Not in the same way. We're forced to accept a body according to our karma. Desire and karma. Desire there in one sense, but ultimately we have no real choice. It's imposed upon us by the material energy. And that we can see, maybe in a minute we'll look into that. But we'll carry on with the Lord's appearance in this world. So what is his pastime? Why does he come into this world? There's a difference between why he comes and why we come, in one sense. Why does he come? Why does he come into this world?
When there's a predominant rise in religion. When there's a predominant rise of irreligion.
And that's explained, isn't it? In the next two verses. text number 7, 8, and 9, these three verses follow them, and this whole first section of the 4th chapter is very well. Every verse is like a sutra unto itself. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharat, or Arjuna, when there's a decline in religious practice and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. It can be a topic unto itself, but that's not the thrust of today's verse and purport, but it describes why he appears. It's his own choice, in one sense. He doesn't have to. One may say, well, he's forced, because whenever there is a decline in religious practice, at that time I descend myself. But it still is his choice. It's a very interesting subject matter of how Krishna knows everything. Yet at the same time, sometimes devotees ask, does he know when I will return? If he knows when I'm going to, let's say, change my view or my relationship, my perception, then where's the free will for the living entity? It's an interesting thing where Krishna is not like an ordinary living entity. There's no reason really why that excludes the free will of the living entity. That choice we have. And there's no reason why Krishna can't know that either, as we're parts and parcels of the Lord. You may know. But he comes on his own free will. But at the same time, he's reciprocating with every living entity. So the purpose of the material world, which he's facilitating the living entities' independent choices, he has a relationship there. Here Krishna himself says, in my original transcendental form he appears. He may appear in various expansions of his original form also, at various times. In this Kali Yuga, oftentimes people ask, well, it seems to me that there's a great decline in religious principles. People don't necessarily know what real religious principles are. But still they can perceive that there's definitely a lot of irreligiosity present, and sinful life, and so on. So why doesn't he appear now, in this age? Well, aspiring devotees, at least in the Gaudiya line, they know that the Lord has appeared in this age, not just in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or in other forms. He may appear in Kali Yuga, but in the form of deities also. But he's also appeared primarily Kali Kala, Namarupa Krishna avatar. That the Lord appears in Kali Yuga in the form of a name. And although the actual religious principles are founded on a structure given later on in this chapter, Chaturvanya Maya Shristam Guna Karma Vibhagasham, that Krishna has given a system for humankind to help them to grow or to progress towards the spiritual path. But in Kali Yuga it's a very fallen age. Kaladoshanade Rajan Astiyaka Mahanguna is full of faults. It's very difficult to even, practically speaking, apply or introduce the Varnashram system, although Prabhupada wants that, and some effort should be there. But the primary appearance of the Lord in this age, he's come in his full form. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has, say, opened the door. He's revealed him. Radha and Krishna have appeared in the form by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya as the Mahamantra. We may chant other mantras, but they refer to other aspects of the Lord, different objectives also. But the Supreme Lord himself is personally present for one and all. There's no hard and fast rules. Everyone has this opportunity to associate with him in this Kali Yuga in the form of the Mahamantra. Not that everybody appreciates or even understands or accepts that. But this is the direct, or they say the direct statements of Shastra that the Lord has appeared in this way. And we hear from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nam Nama Kari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrapita Nimitak Smaranina Kala, and so on. That he's appeared in the holy name and invested all of his transcendental energies, in fact, non-different with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The holy name is Krishna. It is Krishna. It's both, we could say, the association of this mantra, which is Radha and Krishna themselves, purifies our heart, but it's also not just a practice to evoke or to develop our relationship with Krishna or purify our hearts of the contamination of the modes of nature, but it is also the objective goal. The name is everything. And the Lord has appeared in full in the form of the holy name. So we're most fortunate, particularly in this Kali Yuga. Not only the Lord appeared just at the junction of Dwapara and Kali Yuga, not only has he appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this age, very rare that these two forms appear in their original forms like this, once in a day of Brahma. But he's Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Lord Krishna has come and he's given the directions, he's given the philosophy, the basic sambandha, the basic knowledge of our nature and why we're conditioned in this world and why we suffer and enjoy, so to speak, and how we can get out of this world. But most people are not able to apply those instructions so meaningfully in their lives. But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come and given the very simple process, a very simple process of chanting the holy name of Krishna. It's very wonderful. And not just chanting it to achieve something, it is actually the objective. It's the sadhya as well as the sadhana, chanting the holy name of Krishna. So the next verse describes, so the Lord appears, so there's a lot of, whatever it is, but deviation from the norms of human society in this age, and detrimental to people's spiritual growth. So the Lord has appeared in this way, which without anyone's knowledge, practically speaking, everyone can benefit through the chanting of the holy name. In order to deliver the pious, the next verse is also equally famous, in order to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I advent myself millennium after millennium. The real purpose, sometimes we hear this, of the Lord's appearance in this world is to please his devotees, or his aspiring devotees, to protect them, whether it's Nrsimhadev appearing for Prahlad Maharaj, or whatever it may be. But the Lord is very much wants to reciprocate. He reciprocates with the non-devotees in various ways also. But with the devotees, he wants to reciprocate positively. So the Lord appears particularly, although it says here, to deliver the pious, but it's really to enliven the devotees. It's the Lord's pastime. Just like we're not, what are we? We can ask ourselves, but somehow or another, we've come into the association of devotees. We're being absorbed in this. It may not be completely manifested, you could say, not completely realized, but we're, in one way or another, we're in this pastime of the Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Srila Prabhupada has made this accessible to everyone, and we just have to take advantage of that opportunity. So he's come for that reason. Actually, every living entity, of course, is part and parcel of Krishna in one sense. One could say everyone's a devotee in the absolute sense, but we're covered over. So this process uncovers the living entity so we can realize or understand our actual nature and why we're conditioned in this world. We're attached to the idea of enjoying the material objects through the senses. Thus we become conditioned in this world. We think we're the doer. There's a verse in the previous chapter, Prakite Yamani Gunai Kamani Samasha. The living entity in this material world thinks himself the doer of activities. This is the cause of our bondage. We think we're the doer. And thus, he thinks himself the doer of activities. And then what happens? Pardon?
Falls again into
Yeah, we take birth again and again. Actually, everything is carried out by material nature, Krishna says. The living entity is like a witness. But because of our attachment to it, our desire to exploit the material energy, we are the superior energy that's mentioned also in the Bhagavad Gita a little bit later, maybe in the 7th chapter, where Krishna describes his various energies, the material energy, but he also describes, we can look in the 7th chapter maybe. What's that verse? Who knows it? 7, what? I don't remember. 7:7 or something? No. 7:5. 7:4 we heard yesterday. 7th chapter, text 4. What was that one? Bhumir. Kam mano buddhir evacha ahankara itiyam me bina prakritir ashtata. Now all this material energy, all the various breakdown of the material energy, but it's Krishna's energy nonetheless. It's divine, as we heard yesterday, because it comes from him. We're seeing it otherwise, but actually it is Krishna's spiritual energy, just transformed in order to facilitate the errant jivas. But if we go on to text number 5, what's text number 5? The next one after 4. What is that?
Besides its inferior nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, there is a superior energy of mind, which are all living entities who are struggling with material nature and are sustaining the universe.
Yes, we're actually superior nature. We're not really meant to be under this intoxicated influence of the modes of nature. Krishna comes to sober us up, you could say, in one sense. Bring us to our senses. We're struggling in this world. We're struggling. We're trying to overcome material nature, so we struggle because we cannot. We heard that yesterday. Devi Gunamema Mamaya Darache. Comes a bit later, maybe the next 1 or 2 verses, somewhere down line. A little bit later, maybe. And we can't overcome the material nature. We're tiny. We struggle, but everybody knows that. Nobody can overcome the material nature, try as we may. And the process is very simple. We surrender to Krishna. Then one can easily cross beyond it. That's the choice we have. Surrender or not surrender. If we don't want to surrender, we remain under the influence of the material energy. This is our choice, you could say. It may be influenced by the choices of others. The devotees are very merciful. Even though a person doesn't want to surrender, those who understood this go out of their way to try to inspire others or convince others to surrender. Free will. The Lord himself comes to try to inspire us to surrender. But ultimately, we make our choice. Love cannot be forced. It's not just a matter of, fear or law or ignorance or something. Relationship is not based upon that. At least not loving relationship. It's based upon reality. Realization, reality, realization, same root. To realize the reality. And that Lord Chaitanya has given. Sometimes Prabhupada said also, we've cheated you in one sense. You didn't know what you were letting yourself in for. But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was just giving everyone, chant the holy names. Everything will come. Just chant. We see there in this, and then in the next verse, actually is interesting, Krishna says, of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both the origin and the dissolution. He's beyond it. I mean, there's so many verses to explain it. Although Krishna's created this material energy, He's not affected by it in any way. And those who know this transcendental position also become unaffected. You may witness the duality of this world. One may witness the apparent appearance of happiness and distress. But a devotee is equal in both. One who has this realization is not elated when there's happiness and when depressed when there's distress. Transcendental, knowing that these are only effects of the combination of the modes of nature. It's explained in various places in the Bhagavad Gita. We'll read on in the purport. So one thing is Krishna's appearance in this world, to enliven the devotees. Annihilate the demons doesn't just mean killing, it does, but it means also to remove the demoniac mentality. We all have a little bit of demoniac mentality or materialistic mentality in our hearts. So the Lord appears to destroy that. And in this age to establish real religious principles. Vaishnava Dharma, in this age of Kali, Sankirtan is the method of purification, killing of the demons, Cheto Darpana Marjanam Bhava Mahadevagni Nivarpanam. To kill the demons within our heart, the Lord appears. The living entities may be helpless, but when he comes into the association, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of the devotees chanting and hearing, distributing prasadam, distributing books, inviting people for festivals, all kinds of different ways online of connecting people or giving people a chance to associate with Krishna. And this is at least the beginning of their path of liberation or freedom from the conditioning of this world, freedom from ignorance. So Prabhupada goes on in the purport, okay, he's come by his own will. Although he appears to come at various times, ultimately he makes his choice. He's not obligated. He's not like a machine. That's his choice that he comes at various times. That's his choice that he comes to establish religious principles. That's his choice. It's not like there's some other force which he's forced to follow. There is a force of love, but that's something different. There's no external or mechanical force working upon him as such. He comes by his own will, and that is his lila. He's not forced. But very nicely Prabhupada explains the meaning of pastime in this particular purport. Pastime, Prabhupada says here, implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. And this aspect of pastime is not necessarily so much the killing of demons, not even the establishing of religious principles, but the reciprocation of his devotees. When he comes into this world, yes, he reciprocates with the aspiring devotees or the progressing devotees, but he also comes along with his associates and he performs transcendental pastimes within the purview of this so-called material energy, at least at certain times for certain persons. We're very fortunate. But he leaves those, we have them in the form of the Bhagavatam, the Lord's pastimes. And just by hearing those pastimes of the Lord, one's life becomes transformed, one's consciousness becomes transformed. One becomes freed from the effects and the control of the material energy. Becomes controlled by the internal one, becomes attracted to the internal energy. Like a magnet, iron to a magnet. So the Lord comes like that to attract us. That our attraction is deferred away from the material objects towards the spiritual goal, towards Krishna. Prabhupada goes on to describe the body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. We may not like it. Maya is very, you could say, I don't know, merciful may not be the word, but covers the living entity so we're not even aware of that. When we're in the body of a dog or a hog or some other creature or whatever, even a bird or a tree or a fish. Living entity is not thinking like that. God, how did I end up here? This is terrible. I'm a fish. Oh dear. No. Maya's, you say, one of her services is to completely cover the consciousness of the living entity. So the living entity entirely identifies with the body of a fish. And is, I suppose, quite contented in its own way as a fish. Well, happiness and distress come also to a fish too. But obviously not the same kind of happiness and distress in one sense as that of a human or a dog or something. Everyone has their own different set of senses, their own different set. That's described in the 15th chapter, isn't it? Is it the 15th chapter? What is it? Who knows? How the living entity acquires a different set of senses. So out of touch with the Bhagavad Gita. We don't, in most temples, they don't read the Bhagavad Gita anymore. It's off the radar. Once in a while you read it, maybe. Let's see, I may even have the wrong chapter, let's see. Yeah. Here, something here, there we go. The living entity, let's start with text number 7 of the 15th chapter. The living entity in this conditioned world, living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal, fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which includes the mind. Again, the word struggle is mentioned. And text 8, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. It's the conceptions of life that have to change. We have the wrong conception. We identify with this body, we identify with being the enjoyer, with the controller, the proprietor, and so on. This is false conception. We have a false conception. There is no God, or if there is a God, he's just an order supplier, or he's an impersonal energy, or something or another. So many false conceptions, imperfect conceptions are there. And because of that, then we experience all kinds of duality and suffering and happinesses and so on. The living entity, next verse, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, tongue and nose and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all of this. You really have to enter into the purports to get clarification on all these points. It's really amazing. And then it goes on to describe the vision of the transcendentalists and so on and so forth, how they see. So we'll read on from the purport a little bit. We'll go on to some of the points here. When there are bodily reactions, as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood the cause is the spirit, soul, and self. And if we go to the 13th chapter, I don't know if I'll find this verse, let's see. Maybe yes. Yeah, here we are. There's a very amazing verse, and it's very in line with today's verse. It's text number 21 of the 13th chapter, 13:21. Similar to today's Bhagavatam verse, actually. Today's Bhagavatam verse starts Karya Karana Kartvik Ve. And the 21st verse of the 13th chapter starts Karya Karana Kartvik Ve. Quite similar, isn't it? In fact, it's exactly the same. The rest of the verse is not quite the same, but it follows a similar thread. Text 21 of the 13th chapter. Nature is said to be the cause of all material activities and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So exactly what Prabhupada was saying in the purport. And the verse itself, today's Bhagavatam verse says, the feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. So how does that work? How is it that we're the cause of our happiness and distress? Any?
We have our free will.
Excuse me?
Free will.
We have our free will. How we relate to the situation. Our dear God brother Sridhar Maharaj, when he was leaving the world, he had many physical ailments, cancer and various things. And obviously there was a lot of pain. And I think Niranjan Swami, someone asked him, Maharaj, you must be in a lot of pain. He said, the pain is there, but you don't have to suffer. Depends. Of course, it's difficult not to, in that sense. But in the sense that we don't have to identify with it, understanding it's not me. But because everybody identifies with the circumstances of their karma, they are therefore apparently experiencing happiness and distress accordingly. But one who's transcendental just sees it. It's like you're watching a television or something. And you may be very affected by what you're watching, or some news or some information on WhatsApp or something. You become very affected one way or the other. But if we don't identify with it, then it doesn't really affect us much. That example can be applied in so many ways. But it's a matter of identity, false identity. When we identify with this is what Maya means, to identify that which we're not. So when one is not identifying themselves, as explained here, as the eternal part and parcel of the Lord, and everything is being controlled, that Krishna's everywhere, it's all his energy. He's actually, in a sense, Paramatma is the one overseeing all the activities of the material world. The material energy is under his direction. Mayajikshena prakriti suti sacharacharam. It's working under his direction, not ours. When one sees in the light of this knowledge, then one no longer has to be conditioned or forced to respond. It's how we respond to the situations which dictates our future. Whether we respond favorably or unfavorably to various circumstances we find. But a devotee responds in relationship with Krishna. He sees everything in relationship with Krishna, and thus becomes released from the control of the material energy. We'll read the next verse. It's a very interesting subject. Again, you have to read the purport to get more elucidation on this matter. Time is also expiring. The next verse, I would like to read the purport because it's really quite informative. But anyway, you have to read it yourself. Text 21 of the 13th chapter. Text 22, Krishna says, the living entity in material nature is also a very similar verse. Purusha prakriti stohi mukte prakriti jahan gunan karanam guna sangosya sadasat yona janmasya. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with this material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil amongst various species. Next verse. Yet this upadrashta is an overseer. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the supersoul. One who understands the philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth again, regardless of his present position. We see, Ramanuja Prabhu mentioned 4.9 earlier on, Janma Karma Janadivyam Evam Yogati Tatvata. The one who understands Krishna's transcendental nature and supreme dominion over all that be does not take birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode understanding, true understanding, and acting on that understanding, of course, as well, frees the living entity from this bondage. We'll just finish off the last few points here. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Of course, we have our promoters, we have our present body. But still, by engaging that in the service of Krishna, it's considered to become spiritualized. It still appears to be a material body, and sure, we have to relinquish this body in due course of time. But one doesn't have to take another material body. And by the mercy of the Lord, his internal potency awards one with a spiritual form, or a material form which is more suitable for progressing towards that stage of devotion, of purity. We may have whatever we've got now. The essence of our present situation is not necessary to be, complaining about it or, lamenting, hankering, whatever, but to try to utilize this body to our best capacity, our mind and body, whatever we've got. It's not that, if I had that person's body, then I would be better off necessarily. The devotional service means we accept what we've got in one sense, and we try to utilize it. That's our choice. According to its capacity, according to the circumstance, we try to utilize it to our best capacity. The service of Krishna. We all have different, we were hearing last night about quotas. We all have our different quota, which means the various body with its various capacities and subtle nature and what have you. We all have that, so we try to utilize that fully in the service of Krishna. This is pure devotional service in one sense. Another question, what type of body? Of course, in the human form of life, other forms of life are not so suitable, but there are exceptions, and there are good fortunes there, also in other forms sometimes. But generally, this is for the human beings. Most human beings are so engrossed in the mode of ignorance, they're not even aware. And it's very difficult to even penetrate through their coverings. So dull, covered over. So when we're very heavily covered, it's very hard to see through it. But by the grace of the devotees and the grace of the Lord, then everything's possible. At least we can try. We can try. We may have our coverings, of course we do also, of the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And that has to be cleansed also. We all know the different places in the Bhagavatam's first canto, second chapter, also in the previous chapter of this particular volume, in the second canto, in the beginning of the second canto, Lord Rishabhdeva's instruction to his sons. In many places there's very succinct and specific instructions given how we can cleanse these various coverings around the heart. So that the actual truth, as the sun rising in the morning cleanses the darkness, or removes the darkness of night, or removes the fog, then the more we're absorbed in chanting and hearing about Krishna, the more the fog over our consciousness is dissipated. Kechit kevalaya bhaktya vasudeva prana gamdan swastikarsnena niharamiva bhaskara. This is the effect of full devotional service. Mamchayo vyabhicharana. Later on in the 15th chapter, Krishna says, Mamchayo vyabhicharana bhakti yogena sevadeva. Like this in the 15th, maybe it's wrong. Suganam samtitjaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. The one who's engaged in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, doesn't fall down, at once transcends the three modes of material nature and comes to the spiritual platform. Full devotional service. That's the process. And then pure devotional. Full devotional service, in one sense, infers pure, but it doesn't necessarily infer pure. We're following a pure devotee, giving our best, trying our best to be fully engaged. We may not be on that platform of the same platform. Brahmabhuta prasanatmana sochitina kankshati samaksavesha bhutisha madbhaktim navatebra. From the end of the Gita, Krishna explains that actually pure devotional service begins when one comes to the Brahman platform. But a devotee, unknowingly or knowingly, is acting on that platform by following a pure devotee of the Lord. Thus, it is possible that one can be engaged in pure devotional service without any ill motivation or ulterior motive. And this is the mission of Lord Chaitanya, to bring us all to pure devotional service. Prabhupada wanted us. This is what pleases Prabhupada. Prabhupada would sometimes be asked, how can we please you most, Srila Prabhupada? Just become fully engaged in devotional service. Just become Krishna conscious, whatever it is. It's not necessarily the act. We're hearing last night, we're reading. Last night is the attitude in our service, not the service. We try to develop this favourable attitude, even if we can, even if we feel, which we should do, of course, incompetent, unqualified. But we're aspiring to become pleasing to Krishna, aspiring to become pleasing to our spiritual master. And this mentality or this attitude is developing, then our spiritual life is more or less, you could say, by the grace of Krishna, guaranteed. And the last point of this verse today discusses a little bit about the Mayavadi. We discussed that a little bit yesterday, I think. How they, philosophers, the living entities, they think that the living entity, this is also a pastime of the jiva. And Prabhupada then says that pastime means free will. You come for your own enjoyment. You're not forced to. But the living entities, initially you could say that's there. We think that we could enjoy in this world, but it's not true. We can only enjoy really in relationship with Krishna. It's a falsity to think we can enjoy separately from Krishna. Even in this world, everything is provided by Krishna. Nothing exists without Krishna's will. If he doesn't provide it, then we have nothing. Even the Brahma Jyoti is also, you could say, it's Krishna's effulgence, but it's also Krishna's provision for those living entities. So they're not on the same level. Hare Krishna. We're late, but it's Sunday, so maybe not rushing off to work or anything. So anyone, any comments or questions? Oh, Hamiyama Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu.
In terms of not necessarily reacting to our karma or things that are put in front of us, it seems that tolerance is a very important quality. So is tolerance something that some people have it, some people don't, or can we kind of gradually develop it if we're not very tolerant? Like can you talk a little bit about tolerance?
Well, I don't have, but we'll try to reflect on something. Because everyone has tolerance of certain things. Even people in the mode of ignorance, they tolerate others' suffering. They tolerate sometimes their own miserable condition. There's so much in ignorance they don't realize it. Everyone has tolerance of some type or another, whatever mode of nature it is. But if we're looking at the so-called Vaishnava, or whatever we are, whatever we're trying to become, tolerance, well, reacting is also another subject, since you brought that up first. Obviously, we react to circumstances. We're not a stone. Whether we react externally or internally, but there's certainly a reaction there. When a stone hits another stone, there is a reaction, although it may not be a conscious one. The stone makes a noise and it cracks in half, or something happens. Something happens there. When the living entity, when we come in contact with situations, be they pleasant, even Arjuna was very disturbed, reacted in a very disturbed way when Abhimanyu was unlawfully killed in the Battle of Kurukshetra. So reaction is bound to be there. so there's another angle of looking at that. How we react. Okay. Tolerate. So yes, we hear we should be tolerant without being disturbed. It's one of the first instructions. Mutta spashus kunte shitoshna sukadukada. Agamapayano nichas tamstatik shashva. Tamstatik shashva bharta bharta. You have to learn to tolerate without being disturbed. Knowing. With knowledge. That's okay, you could say. But still, we have other responsibilities in life. So it's a big topic, and it's very, according to our position in life, we're forced to respond in different ways to the circumstance. But the devotee always tries to see things in relationship with Krishna. We respond, but we try to see our response in relationship with Krishna. If you're a leader or a manager, you don't just tolerate misbehavior, you have to respond to it. You don't just tolerate it. Oh, that's their karma. Let their head be chopped off. Let them, the Buddha is not irresponsible with cows. Especially if one's in leadership or family, responsibilities are there. We have to react to circumstances for duty. Even if we don't have realization, at least according to scriptural duty directions are there. So response has to be there. We may not be perfect in our response, but we have to do what we can to try to do the best, perform our duty. But we try to see it in relationship with Krishna. That's why the Shastras are there, to give guidance to us how we, it's not so simple as that, but that's the principle, to try to follow the right course of action in relationship with various circumstances, because ultimately the scripture comes from Krishna. The direction comes from Krishna. The devotee may be praying to the Lord in the heart for direction, how to deal with this difficult situation. I haven't got the strength, I haven't got the intelligence. But he's turning to Krishna, they're turning to Krishna. To turn to Krishna, to see everything in relationship with Krishna, instead of just responding. A vivid example, I don't know how it came to my mind, but it just sprang into my mind there. When there's a big tsunami, maybe 20 years ago, I can't remember how long ago, in Indonesia, a long time ago, and I was in Penang when it happened, and there that tsunami hit Penang also. We had the earthquake, very mild earthquake, nothing like what you had here, but still it was an earthquake nonetheless. And some of the reactions, you saw the reactions of the various people. And some of the reactions were so gross. Anger, filthy anger. I spoke to one man just the day after the earthquake and the tsunami. He lost many of his family members. He was from Banda Aceh, which was the heart of the tsunami and the earthquake. And he was trying to make his way there to see if there's any way his family are still alive or could help. And I said, well, what do you think of all this? He was a Muslim. He said, everything is under the Lord. Whatever the Lord arranges, whatever God, he didn't say Lord, he said God, Supreme, Allah. He had a kind of a pretty, in one sense, what may not have been a very elevated in personal relationship, but in understanding, he was pretty convinced that, what is everything depends on Allah, not on us. He was in that mood. And another person is like cursing and cussing and bashing his fist against the wall and swearing. And another person is very busily trying to conquer over it. Everyone reacts differently. And because the example of that Muslim gentleman, Prabhupada had the same thing when the bombs were going off in Calcutta. He saw it in relationship a little bit more personalized, I suppose, as a universal form of the Lord manifest in this particular way. So an actual devotee tries to see things in relationship with Krishna, but still we have to react. We still have to act, so react or act in accordance to the need, accordance to our duty, accordance to Arjuna. Krishna basically the Bhagavad Gita was to get Arjuna to get up and fight, even though Krishna said, even if you are in knowledge, still you have to act according to your nature, to lead others on the righteous path, performing their duty accordingly, but in the right way, not in a wrong way, but in the correct way according to Guru Shastra Sadhu. So action must be there also, both. We act, as the 18th chapter, Krishna says over and over again to Arjuna, perform your duty, but be in consciousness of me. In that way, one is not controlled by the nature, but one uses the nature. We see it in Krishna's energy, we utilize it according to his will. Our subtle and gross bodies are Krishna's energy, we utilize them as much as we can according to the will of the Lord. We don't just say there, I'm not this body, full stop, that's Mayavadi approach, but a devotee actively uses Krishna's energy for Krishna's pleasure. So we have to find that out. The devotee cannot tolerate seeing Krishna's energy not being used in his service, so we don't tolerate that. So I devotees sometimes we may still be controlled by our, say our mind and senses or the material energy, but a pure devotee sometimes gets angry. Why? Because he can't tolerate to see that people are acting in such a way as to displease Krishna, to misuse their human form of life. So tolerance. We don't tolerate, sometimes active notes say, we don't tolerate humbug. Old English saying for nonsense. So we don't tolerate our mind going crazy. We don't tolerate, but how we don't tolerate that, that's another detail. Not that you punch them in the face or something, or beat your head with a stick, just like we hear. In the morning when we get up, we should beat our minds 100 times with a shoe. Sometimes devotees imitate that. They take a shoe and start banging their head. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it means that we meditate on the pure devotees of the Lord as soon as we arise in the morning. Our parampara. And different ways you tolerate. We don't tolerate the nonsense. We replace it. We don't just not tolerate. We replace it. For a devotee, tolerance means to see things in relation with Krishna and not separately. Try to practice the positive side of it, not just like, I tolerate. You have the example of Stalin, who tolerated the pain of this operation without any anesthesia because he was afraid they might kill him if they put him on an anesthesia. So he wanted to be fully conscious so he could make sure that it went properly, even though he must have been suffering tremendous pain. So tolerant for a higher purpose. So we have a higher purpose, the highest purpose. Love to serve Krishna, to please Krishna. Anyway, it's a very big topic, tolerance. Very big. Trinada Pisa Nichana Toro Pisa Ishtana. Anything else?
So Prabhupada talked about a burden of love.
Burden of love.
Burden of love. He gave the example of like sometimes a lady will wear big earrings and they may be very uncomfortable. She's wearing them for her husband, to attract her husband, even though it's uncomfortable for her to do like this. So in our life, everything, so many disturbances will come, but if our focus is on pleasing Krishna, then it becomes a burden of love, because we know that this is leading so that we can actually develop our love for Krishna.
Yeah. Yeah. Preaching Krishna consciousness is not easy in one sense, but it's easy in another sense because it's constitutional. It's our nature. Pure devotee always wants to ultimately please Krishna, but it also includes the jivas who are his part and parcels. He can't tolerate to see paradukkha dukkhi, the suffering of other living entities. He can't tolerate that. And the fact that the living entities unknowingly. It's like your child. If you have a child and you see your child doing something which is definitely going to cause it suffering, you can't tolerate that. If you see a blind man walking into the road on a highway, you do everything you can to stop them doing it. Appears to be a little and you say, well, just tolerate, don't be disturbed. Gets run over. With your child, the same thing. No, the body cannot tolerate to see someone doing something which will cause their own suffering. A doctor can. Sometimes the patient reacts against the doctor actually doing that which is favourable, but the patient doesn't see it like that. Sometimes you see it's causing me suffering. So the body, when in knowledge particularly, does everything they can to alleviate the suffering of our living entities and ultimately to try to please Krishna, to bring them back to Krishna for Krishna's pleasure. Burden of love. People don't always appreciate. Even other devotees don't always appreciate. Children don't always appreciate the restrictions put upon them by their parents or the admonishment which may be there sometimes. They don't always appreciate. Maybe later on. And we don't always appreciate either. Why these rules and regulations? Why? So we're still under the modes of nature, identifying with the body, thinking that my life is a material thing. This is the illusion. Anything else? Okay, we will finish there. Thank you very much. So we were a bit sleepy this morning for various reasons. We had a full-on day yesterday and what to do. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Premanandi